welcome to today's webinar. My name is Akanksha Sharma, and I work as a Research and Insights Director at the GSMA Mobile for Development team. Just to tell you a bit about the GSMA, we are an association of more than 750 mobile operators and 400 companies in the broader ecosystem. Through our Mobile for Development work, we explore how mobile solutions can and already are having a phenomenal impact on people's lives by enabling access to basic services. Today, I'm here to present a paper that was released just last week with support from the Mastercard Foundation. As you can see on the slide here, the report talks about powering youth employment through mobile industry in Sub-Saharan Africa by 2025. So the time frame for most of our findings is up until 2025. Very quickly now, just to give you a sense of the session, I will begin by presenting some key findings from our paper. After that, my colleague Sam Ajadi will invite our three distinguished guests up, and we'll have more of a free-flowing debate around some of the key issues touched upon in the paper. And then we'll throw it open to questions from the audiences. Now, since we've lost time, it might be a bit rushed and I might have to cut down on a few slides, but I'll try to pack things up as much as possible in the shortest time. Starting with the context, Sub-Saharan Africa has the largest growing youth population in the world. In the last couple of decades, the youth population has grown by 70%. By 2050, this is set to nearly double. Also, the good news is that education levels are expected to improve. So 52% of Africa's total workforce is expected to have at least a secondary education by 2030. This is an improvement from 36% in 2010. Having said that, the education system is perceived as low quality by students and by employers, and it's failing to meet the needs of the changing economy. Going forward, the nature of work is also going to change, and this is going to put additional strain on already inadequate education systems. Another challenge is the lack of quality formal employment. The International Labour Organization estimates that over 75% of all non-agricultural employment in 2018 was informal. By informal, we mean economic activities that by law or in practice are not covered sufficiently by a formal arrangement. Now, this is due to underdeveloped social security systems. The youth are obliged to take up any form of employment which meets their basic living standards. If you talk about the highly skilled workforce, lack of formal employment means migration, both from rural to urban areas, as well as outside native countries. Moving on, if we look at what the contribution of mobile industry towards employment, in 2018, the industry employed 1.9 million people directly and over 2.4 million people in the broader mobile ecosystem. Here, I must clarify, by direct jobs, we refer to jobs that are created by mobile network operators, infrastructure providers, retailers, distributors, handset manufacturers, content application and service providers. We explicitly exclude any economic value that's generated through mobile commerce. As in that case, the mobile technology and services are typically a contributor, but they're not the driver of the value that's generated. Now here, if you see, you will note that the jobs created in the informal sector are much higher than those in the formal sector for the mobile industry. So, with support from Mastercard Foundation and our research partners, Archipel & Co., who've also joined us for the webinar today, we try to estimate the current and future contribution of the mobile industry in job creation. We've also done a country-level analysis of Ghana, Senegal, and Nigeria. I might not be able to touch upon a lot of those details in the webinar today, but please look at the paper to find out more. The second thing is that the role of mobile industry does not stop at just job creation. So through the research, we have also talked about the numerous barriers that the youth face in finding, retaining, and growing in their careers. Besides a very thorough desk research, findings from this research have been drawn from about 45 interviews with subject matter experts from the mobile industry, so mostly people from human resources, operations, and strategy background, and youth employment organizations, universities, investment funds, innovation hubs, you name them. We also did a very interesting workshop in Accra in November 2019, where we had 17 of our experts sat in a room deliberating about some of our early findings, and together we laid out a roadmap with short and long-term strategies for the mobile industry to support employment in the region. Now, let me drill down from the overall 1.9 million figure that I stated earlier to the contribution from youth. If you look at the youth, 65% of the jobs in the mobile sector are currently filled by youth, which we are defining as 15 to 34-year-olds. Nearly 2/3 of these are in informal sector. What's going to change by 2025? There are a few drivers, and we worked on these through, of course, literature reviews, but also discussed this with our experts and then validated these in the workshop. But we came up with 7 big drivers that can impact youth employment in Sub-Saharan Africa by 2025. Again, please note that this is only 5 years worth of forecasting. So while you might think AI and IoT and blockchain are disruptors that are going to come in, their impact by 2025 might not be that big. What we found was that the industry-led drivers, as in where mobile industry has the most power to affect a change, for instance, increased network coverage, smartphone penetration, and innovation at the back of mobile services, we found that these drivers will potentially be the most cost-effective employment catalysts for the industry by 2025. We have someone from Archipel & Co. on the call today as a guest expert, and I will try to ask Mathilde more about how we came through to these drivers. Based on some of these drivers, we then forecasted what will be the youth employment in Sub-Saharan Africa through mobile industry to 2025 in terms of numbers. So you see that the industry is expected to directly employ 1.5 million youth. That's 300,000 new jobs to be created. About 1 million of these jobs will be in informal sector, which means that even in the next 5 years, as per the current estimates, the dominance of informal jobs is not set to change. This poses challenges. Challenges, A, in creating decent work opportunities, but also ensuring that the mobile industry is able to support the youth in their employment journeys. And these challenges differ depending on the nature of the job. So it could be formal or informal. They differ based on the level of jobs, so entry-level, mid-level, senior-level jobs. They differ by countries, cultural contexts, and vulnerability of certain groups, such as rural youth, women, and persons with disabilities. What we found, so we spoke to our expert group to better understand these challenges, and we found that the skills gap, which is a situation in which the level or types of skills do not correspond to labor market's need, is actually the biggest challenge in youth employment in Sub-Saharan Africa. There are lots of reasons for this. You name them. So ineffective education systems. There's a disconnect between the needs of the job market and what's being taught by the universities. There is shortage of early working opportunities where youth can get some of these skills through internships and apprenticeships. And then cultural barriers, which was quoted as a significant barrier by a lot of our expert group members, who said that, in Sub-Saharan Africa, a lot of times youth do not have the soft skills needed to even express their opinions, because culturally they tend to respect their elders and don't freely express their opinions or assert themselves. On the other hand, we found that technical skills might be expected to be the most value driver in the tech-driven sector. You might think technical skills are what's most required. It is in fact the behavioral skills, such as communication, negotiation, teamwork, leadership, that are most in demand. Our expert group identified that digital skills is also a very pressing issue, particularly in hiring middle-skilled workers. It's mostly intermediate level digital skills, such as the use of professional software or emails, that are essential to perform tasks effectively. That's where the gap lies significantly. Needless to say, but skills gap differs by job types. Some findings here have been very interesting. So like for low-skilled jobs, most needed skills are digital skill and communication skills. But what's in greatest shortage is actually the entrepreneurial skills, the ability to take risks, to succeed in one's career, to expand what might be just a kiosk maybe, or to sell mobile top-ups, to more number of kiosks or a better shop or a proper shop. In order to do that, the youth need entrepreneurial skills, skills to manage one's finances better. This is where there is the greatest shortage, and it's required the most as well. Communication skills are some of the two most, and creativity are the two most important skills for middle-skilled jobs, who are often client-facing and in fieldwork positions. But the gap is in problem solving. As one of our experts put it, he said, young people finishing school today lack problem solving skills, which is essentially what we do at work on a daily basis. And they need to be able to take decisions. This is where we see the greatest shortage. Moving on, there are a lot of other barriers. Finding jobs is hard, starting from merely spotting jobs and or selling their skills to the employer, being able to write a good resume, being able to present in the interview and sell their skills to the employer is very hard. There is a disconnect between the expectations and opportunities for the youth. And financial barriers can also be really big, particularly because inadequate education forces youth to upskill themselves. That means additional funds are required to pay for the trainings that they have to undertake. Not surprisingly, even for these trainings, the youth often opt for technical training courses. And as we just saw, the gap is the biggest in behavioral skills. And so even after spending all of this money, the youth are not able to get the skills that are most needed. According to some of our youth employment experts, another barrier was that the private companies recruit often top achievers from the best schools. Some believe that youth potential is not assessed or valued properly. This not only creates barriers for job seekers, but also significantly limits the talent pool for the employers. If you look at vulnerable youth groups, there are specific challenges. For rural youth, as I just mentioned, the financial implications of upskilling themselves. For rural youth, this means they also have to relocate, arrange for temporary accommodation, food, deterring them from upskilling even more. For women, it's work-life balance issues, safety concerns. With a heavily patriarchal society, this is a big challenge in Sub-Saharan African region. For youth with disabilities, mobile industry players themselves admit that there is still a lot of way to go in terms of ensuring suitable infrastructure to welcome the persons with disabilities. And they've not been proactive enough in their efforts to employ youth with disabilities so far. Again, persistent stereotypes have an impact on how you hire a person with some visible disabilities. So, what we did was we mapped out a roadmap sitting with our experts, including long and short-term strategies for mobile operators to help youth in their employment journeys. In the short term, these are solutions that the mobile industry can actually implement very quickly and with limited investments. These can range from anything from scholarships to internships to creating mechanisms to promote gender equality or parental benefits, flexible working hours. These could be launching dedicated research to understand the expectations and needs of what are being called as millennials. This was a very heavily discussed issue in our workshop and within our experts. The generational gap is a huge one, and technology has actually created a bigger gap there. So the mobile industry actually needs to explore this more and hear more from the youth to understand their expectations and their needs. And vice versa. I mean, what are the needs and expectations of the industry? So just that communication, it can be started pretty quickly and can be implemented as a short-term strategy. Designing capacity building programs to target low-skilled and informal workers, again, is a very short-term strategy that can be applied. In the longer term, however, there are solutions towards complex challenges which require the mobile operators to partner with other agencies. So they can, for example, they can promote future-ready education by working with the education providers and universities. That takes more of collaboration and should definitely be seen as a long-term but very important strategy for the mobile industry. Accelerating and supporting entrepreneurship in the mobile industry ecosystem, fostering entrepreneurship, particularly among the vulnerable youth groups, is also a strategy that was laid out in our roadmap. We talk about this in great detail in our report with case studies from some existing initiatives by mobile operators. So I would encourage you to go and read the report and find out much more. Finally, we're running short on time, so I won't delve deeper into this slide, but the report also talks about 3 countries, Ghana, Senegal, and Nigeria, where we've estimated the job count in terms of current and future jobs. We've segmented this by the level of qualification, so low, middle, and high-skilled jobs. And we have also explored particular specific case studies for all of these countries. For instance, Soronco Foundation in Ghana, Senegal Academy in Senegal, and Digify Africa Academy in Nigeria. So you could read our reports to find out more in terms of the case studies, both country-specific case studies as well as case studies that we've tagged along with the roadmap. Needless to repeat, there's lots more in our report and even more information at the back end, which we couldn't pour into the publication, but we'd love to speak to you about. So please feel free to reach out to us. I can't possibly close without thanking the MasterCard Foundation and the very amazing expert group consulted for this report. I'm sure some of you are there on the webinar and you can hear me, so thank you very much. I'd like to pass the control now to my colleague, Sam, who will be leading on a panel discussion with our expert group. Sam, over to you.
Thank you, Kansha. So before we jump into, I'll just do a quick introduction to the panelists. So Rakaya is the head of digital ecosystem relations at Sonatel. Sonatel is a mobile operator in Senegal. Part of our role at Sonatel has been to support the implementation of the 2025 digital plan. George is the executive head of sales and distribution at Vodacom Tanzania, where he's in charge of sales and distribution channel management. And Mathilde is a manager at Achebo & Co., which is a consulting company dedicated to inclusive business and social innovation. She's in charge of designing bottom of the pyramid strategies for organization across industries, and GSMA worked closely with Achebo & Co. in shaping and delivering this research. So these 3 speakers, they've been instrumental in shaping this research. without further ado, we jump straight into the panel.
Just to add one more point, I would encourage people on the webinar to start asking questions. You can type them in the chat box, and while Sam asks some questions to the panel, we'll have an open Q&A in the end, and there you can ask more questions.
So I'll start with Mathilde. Mathilde, our research highlights that the mobile industry-led drivers, so including coverage, smartphone penetration, and innovation, will be the most cost-effective drivers of youth employment in the next 5 years. I know Akancho touched on this earlier. Could you please expand on the methodology and process behind this assessment?
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much, and good afternoon to everyone. So basically, the way that we've been working is the following. So the first step, of course, was to assess the main trends that were likely to have a significant impact in terms of job creation for the mobile industry, and make sure that we had the right shortlist of trends and driver of employment change. So to do so, first of all, we conducted a rigorous literature review to identify a first list of driver. We've been confronting this first list with insights from the interviews that we've been conducted with 45 people from the industry and the broader telecommunication ecosystem. And finally, you mentioned the organization of a great workshop with experts. So we presented this list of drivers to the experts from the continent, so that they had the opportunity to challenge it and to validate it, and so that we have a consensus over the main drivers that are likely to have an impact, and that we've been categorizing into three clusters. Then, of course, the idea was to ask two questions and to assess two dimensions. The first was the change in the total number of jobs created or destroyed. So that is to say, what is the impact of each driver on the evolution of job number until 2025. So to do so, we designed a scale, of course, based on the evolution of employment in recent years on the region, so that it's consistent. And the second dimension that we assessed was the efforts required by the industry to achieve the best potential scenario of this driver. So if I am taking the smartphone penetration driver, for instance, the question would be, what is the effort required to have to succeed in having an adoption rate of over 65% in the region, which is actually the GSMA trajectory. And this idea of efforts, we've been using two factors to assess it. One is the order of magnitude in terms of investment required. Is it minor, a moderate, or a major investment? And the second is the implementation difficulty. So you may have, of course, drivers that are more or less complicated to achieve. Let me just take an example. If we're discussing about enabling regulation, it might not require a lot of investment because it's mostly about policy changes, but that doesn't mean it's easy to implement because it's actually not really dependent on the mobile industry. So that was the overall objective and why we call it cost-effective scenarios. And then the assessment themselves, how did we proceed? Once we had agreed on the driver, on the scale, we based our assessment on the knowledge of our high-level mobile industry experts from the continent, and we conducted the assessment with them. And with this kind of methodology, what is really interesting is to actually have a collective, it's really based on collective intelligence and discussion, so that everyone can actually confront their own assessment, challenge each other, and then find an agreement on what is the most likely assessment to make. So that's for the general methodology.
Thank you, Mathilde. Maybe let's focus on the challenges. What are some of the insights that you found on that front? Could you briefly share from the research, what are some of in terms of youth employment in certain vulnerable groups, can you shed some insights on what you found in sort of rural youth, women, or persons with disabilities. Could you share some insights on those?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So indeed, what was really interesting also about this study is what we focus is on so-called vulnerable groups, and the overall idea of that was to try to understand if you have some specific difficulties if you're coming from one of these three sub-segment of the youth, if I can call it this way, and so we had a lot of literature review on that, which is really abundant when it comes to rural youth, youth with disabilities, and women youth, of course. And we confronting that as well with the interview that we had with the experts, not only from the industry, but also from youth employment organization and so on. And so one of the main insights that we had is that these vulnerable groups do enter the labor force with less assets and fewer assets than others. So there is a real imbalances in the education, for instance. Just giving you a couple of figures that are quite striking, but if you take the example of rural youth, according to the World Bank, you have today 80% of this rural youth age between 12 to 14 that have not attended school versus 6% for urban youth. If you take female, today 35% of female youth that are not in employment, education or training versus 20% of male, also according to the World Bank. And when it comes to youth with disabilities, there are like a lot of study by WHO on the subject, showing that primary completion rates of girls, for instance, with disabilities are 10 points lower than for girls without. So this asset issue is definitely something that is very striking. And there is also a lot of figures and interesting insight on the fact that this subsegment of the youth have also less access to some kind of very useful tools, including digital tools, when it comes to the use of the mobile internet, for instance. So that's for a general insight, and maybe just digging into a bit deeper. But I think that Akanksha is also outlining such difficulties. But of course, for rural youth, a lot of things are about the geographical barrier, because everything, training centers, university, job opportunities are mostly based in one or two big cities. And of course, the lack of financial resources is also a curse and a barrier for them. That's for sure. For women, I think that was really about systemic and cultural barriers that experts and literature review pointed out. So unfortunately, of course, sexual harassment and gender discrimination, including at the workplace, are still an issue, even though there are some progressive policies. Lack of HR policy also in terms of how to make sure that you can properly balance your professional and personal life as a woman has been very often highlighted. And which is also a reality is the lack of women represented in senior position, and the lack of role models for women also today in the mobile industry, which is interesting in terms of roadmap after. Youth with disability, to conclude rapidly, of course, the question of access is key. Access at schools and access at the workplace. And I just want also to point out that a lot of experts was also saying that despite the efforts made, there is still a lot of jobs to fight against stereotypes that exist among and that targets disabled people.
Thank you for that, Mathilde. George, we'll move over to you. Mathilde spoke a little bit about the asset issue, the need for skills and tools. Akanksha touched on the behavioral skills, the lack of behavioral skills. So on this point, the lack of behavioral skills really came up as the key, as a key challenge to youth employment in the region. What are your thoughts on this?
All right. Okay. Following the study, what we had discussed together with other group of experts. And as you can see, actually, in the finding, Talking about skills, actually, we came up to realize there is a skill gap. And on top of mind, skill gap is the situation in which the level of type of skills available do not actually correspond well with the labor market needs. And we're actually seeing that quite happening in the mobile industry, as there is quite a number of skills that are actually demanded and actually in the short supply. So, for instance, technical skills. There's quite high demand of technical skills in the mobile industry. It's estimated in terms of proportionality, about 17% of the total, skills that is required is 17. Is the technical skills, and the supply is only 9%. You can see, and the list goes on into analytical skills, digital skills, and a huge portion in behavioral skills as well. And in each area, you will see that what is available in the market in Sub-Saharan Africa is in low supply compared to the demand. And majority of that is actually attributed to the education system in Sub-Saharan Africa, as that is usually perceived to be ineffective. So there is usually some sort of a disconnect between universities and the industries. So what is being taught usually, even in the current period, is old materials, which are not relevant to the current world, current industry, what the industry requires. And also the shortage of
George, on that point, what are your thoughts on the behavioral skills, the lack of behavioral skills? Could you shed some light?
Behavioral skills, exactly. Now, just to expand on the behavioral skills, it basically refers to the ability of a person to, interpersonal skills and, social situations, a bit of somebody to navigate. So we are talking about skills like communication skills, creativity, entrepreneurial skills, and leadership. And I think my colleague Akanskia, when she was presenting, you saw especially the gap on entrepreneurial skills. People are not able to take risks, and this is, attributed to, number one, the education system, but again, the background is from where we are coming from. Majority of Sub-Saharan Africa, when a student has completed university, they have a huge burden of people, dependents at home, their parents, and probably the siblings. So they go with fearful attitude, if I may say, and they are not able to take up challenges and to take risks. And usually you get better returns when you take better risks. So there's always a gap in terms of behavioral skills, like I was explaining. So in terms of communication, creativity, entrepreneurship, and leadership. Number one, like I said, they're not taught properly in schools and universities. But number two, the background of our lives in Sub-Saharan Africa does not make somebody to take up the leadership. People are so submissive. They take a passive position. They are not, risk takers and stuff like that.
Thank you. Thank you, George, for that. Ruqayyah,
thank you very much.
Ruqayyah, over to you. So one of the countries that we did a deep dive, in this research is Senegal. Ruqayyah, what do you think is the biggest challenge facing youth employment through the mobile industry in Senegal?
Thank you, Sam. As you know, the mobile industry is a significant job creator for youth in Sub-Saharan, especially in Senegal. You know that we have a growing youth population, but the increasingly educated and inadequate skills, you told it, workforce is a real challenge for us, for our economies. But it's a generation for jobs, and it will support youth employment. Actually, the mobile industries in Sub-Saharan employed 1.2 million youth, and the number is expected to grow a lot in years to come. So it's a real challenge for us. The skill gaps is, for me, the greatest challenge we have for youth seeking employment in the mobile industry, actually. Ineffective education systems with behavioral and digital skills. We have many barriers for youth employment, including the expenses. So many challenges to face, and gender gap also.
Great. Thank you for that. Let's move on to the roadmap. You pointed us to, we've seen that Senegal Academy is one of the examples that we are highlighted in the reports, and it's actually often cited as a benchmark initiative supporting youth employment in Sub-Saharan Africa, through the mobile industry. Could you tell us more about the program and the initiative?
Yes, we created Senegal Academy, our School of Coding. The context is a strong need of developers in Senegal. As I said, a young and growing active population, many graduates in subjects little requested by companies, and very high cost private training. So what we did is we create a school of coding, and the objectives were to meet digital skills needs and strengthen the employability of young people. Bring young people into the job market with IT. It was really important. And we create the first free coding school in Senegal. And we train young Senegalese people in digital professions. And we want to make digital as a powerful level for economic and social development and inclusion. And what we want to be is the main players in the digital revolution in Senegal and in West Africa. So we have a multidisciplinary team, and we offer a certificate and work with the government for that. And the result we expect is to restore opportunities for young dropouts. We have lots of young in the academy that don't even have a degree, but they have the skills. They have soft skills to pursue all the program in the academy. We teach them to create web and mobile application. And it's really important for Sonatel as a CSR. We are very engaged in CSR, so it's really important for us to have this kind of program. We have web and mobile development courses. We have, and the fact is that we have them to develop all those skills. It's a program of 7 months. And after we accompany all those young to find jobs in the telecom industry, in the ICT industry, we will launch in 2 weeks the first program with 200 young people that will come in the academy for us 8-month courses.
That's great. Could you shed some light on why Sonatel is invested in young people, in the youth?
We have to invest in young people because they represent half of the population, and in the case to come, the population of our country will double. So, and you have lots of opportunities in digital and in ICT. It's an opportunity to create lots of jobs, and also for us to train them in skills and work that we need for our companies. Because sometimes we have lots of difficulties to find good profiles that we need in the market, in IT, for example. So the school is an opportunity for us to train those young people and after to have them work for our company.
Thank you. And what has made the program? I mean, to date, you've been able to train a number of youths. Could you tell us what you think has made the Senegal Academy successful?
What made it successful? We have a very good curriculum that we deploy with Simplon, which is a French company that accompany us in all the curriculum we have actually in the academy. What made us successful? We have the coding program, but also we train all those young and in entrepreneurship, because they will not all find jobs in companies, but they can be entrepreneurs. So as soon as they start, there is a program of entrepreneurship to make them think about what kind of projects they can develop once they will leave the school, become startups, develop their own company, and not need to find job in any other company, but be the one who will create jobs.
Thank you. Just a reminder, if you've got any questions, so for everyone on the line, if you've got any questions, please please put your comments, your questions in the chat. George, just over to you. So just on the question of on Vodacom Tanzania, could you tell us, maybe shed some light on the work that Vodacom has done with the youth, and how do you work with young people in Tanzania?
In Tanzania, okay. Number one, in Vodacom Tanzania, we have embarked on digital transformation, as is the story across the Vodacom market. And when you're talking about digital transformation, we are formulating what we call agile squad. So we are transforming our ways of working, and whatever that we want to develop, we are going into in-house development of various systems and tools, and we do that in-house using agile squad. So now automatically this becomes these are the digital decoders, the software developers who are created. So we've created special environments for them. Every department is number one, put special facilities for them. You have the new, state-of-the-art agile setting. How the project tables and all that kind of stuff. And we do employ young people, inevitably, because they are the ones with the skills that are required. So we have software developers. We have the entire squad. The agile Scrum masters, the product owners and stuff like that, who are young people sitting together to try and create new tools. Since we started in April last year, the first squad has already developed 2 systems which are working for us, and they've been able to transform our entire acquisition channel from an old analog system into a digital platform, which is amazing. It allows us to save a lot of cost, and it allows the guys on the field to actually get information about the work that they do instantly using their mobile phone. So, that's the major thing that's happening in Tanzania regarding young people. And going forward, our HR department is organizing itself such that to have a particular section within HR that is geared to, recruitment. We'll be specialized in recruiting young people, because we realize that when the old generation people are recruiting young people, there's always a disconnect in various ways of life. So they're going to separate and then formulate a particular section within HR that is specialized only to recruit and maintain young people within the organization.
Thank you, George. Mathilde, over to you. Could you give us, you conducted 45 interviews looking at, from mobile operators to youth employment organizations, universities, investment funds. What are some of the examples? Maybe let's focus on the mobile operators. What are some of the examples that stood out to you during the interviews and the research?
Yes, sure. Thank you. So it's true that we had this opportunity to discuss with a lot of different people and different players, and I think it's super interesting to see that. Of course, the challenge is a big challenge, but we also have a lot of solution and mobile network operators also getting involved at different level. So that is true that a lot of telco and mobile network operators today have developed already some system of internships, scholarships, graduate and apprenticeship program that also George mentioned. So you have, just to give a couple of examples, but for instance, MTN Nigeria Foundation is awarding annual scholarship in science, engineering, and mathematics to different students, including some of these that are dedicated to youth with disabilities. So it's also interesting that we have initiative really taking care into the subsegment of vulnerable youth, the one we call vulnerable youth in this report. In the training part of it, of course, the example of Sonatel and the increasing program that MNOs are launching in partnership with other stakeholders, such as like the social startup Samplon. It's true that we also have to acknowledge that tech companies are quite involved in this part of youth upskilling. So you have big program from Microsoft Apprenticeship Factory. You have the digital school by Google. That are also quite big. So definitely something also that has been developed. And I think that's something also that is really interesting because it's a point that is quite important to. It's one of the insights from this study, I think, is that we have also to be aware that a large majority of the employment created today, and that will be created in the future by 2025, is going to be informal employment, including for the youth. So I think there is a lot of questions around how do we help also these youth to upskill, to help them gain better opportunities and maybe become like entrepreneurs, and also help them on their day-to-day basis. And it's interesting to see that some MNOs are also taking that into consideration and launching programs. So you have program launch in Cameroon to train airtime resellers, including women, and you can find details on the report. And you also have in Nigeria an interesting scheme to offer microcredit to also this informal people and airtime reseller. So it's also interesting to see that on these kind of topics, we also have proactive initiative from mobile network operators.
Thank you, Mathilde. So this is an open question to all. So I'll let so anyone that wants to pick it. So this is from George. It says, how can the mobile industry leverage informal sector dynamics, stroke entrepreneurship, and contribute to innovative pathways towards formalization?
This is a.
That's open. Can we all answer, or this is the question? Okay, sorry. Sorry, I thought it was for Lugata, but I'm happy to answer because it's kind of the transition to what I was saying. Thank you for this question because I think yes, definitely a huge part of the employment will be informal. So you have the training, and I mean I think this is really emerging as a practice to really be aware that of this informal micro entrepreneur. So as I was mentioning, I think that part of what can be done is to help them access better opportunities. So that could be training, of course. That's access to microcredit, loans to help them also become entrepreneur and build their own path. And also something that is interesting is this idea of social incentives. So you have been having program with outside of the MNOs actually, but that's quite inspiring, and I know that some MNOs have done it also. But it's also to help this micro entrepreneur access social protection and insurance, which is something key because when you think about it, when you're deprived of such solution, it means that you can fall back into poverty very easily. So this is also small steps towards formalization, and where through private insurance and micro insurance products that are become more and more available on the market, there is a room for mobile network operators in the industry to play in that, and that's a step towards formalization as well.
Thank you. There's just a question for Rakaya, so from Wade. So you spoke about Senegal Academy, and knowing that it also focuses on entrepreneurship as well and boosting entrepreneurship in Senegal. Could you shed some light on that entrepreneurship angle? Actually, do you perhaps provide startup capital or do you connect them with like funding sources and hubs? Could you shed some more light on the work that you do with Sonatel?
Yes, in Senegal and in programs we have, first we have a special program for women entrepreneurs because you have in West Africa one of the highest rates of women entrepreneurs in the world, around 25, 26%. So we have an incubation program of 6 months to help them develop ideas, go to the phase of proof of concept and product market fit. So, and after we have found Orange Digital Venture to fund startups, and we also have partnership with VC and local. So once we have startups that have great ideas and that can be upscaled, we accompany them with the VC to have all the funds they need to develop their activity. But most of the entrepreneurs we have here, around 80%, are in the level of ideation. So they just have an idea, and sometimes you must have to accompany them 1 or 2 years to have something that can be scaled. So we are in this phase actually. More and more young try to be entrepreneurs, have the skills to be entrepreneurs. You have more and more programs here in Senegal, incubators, co-working space to train, and also the state, the government also have a huge program to accompany young and special women in this in entrepreneurship. So we think that is something that will more and more develop here in Senegal and will be a real opportunity for young.
Thank you for that. There's actually a follow-on question by Richard. So it's any lessons? What are any lessons learned from influencing the risk appetite of young entrepreneurs through the training program?
Sorry?
So are there any lessons learned from influencing the risk appetite of young entrepreneurs through the programs that Sonatel runs?
The lessons, when young entrepreneurs come to see Sonatel, what they want first is money. They think that they only need cash to develop that activity, but they are not aware that soft skills, for example, is necessary because a startup is an enterprise. So you must be able to run an enterprise. And we did a mistake at the beginning when we launched the entrepreneurship program. It was just a funding, and it was not a success. So now we have half of the program funding and the other half really to train them, because when you give them money and they don't know how to use it, this is not something that will be able to develop in a long-term period.
Thank you. Mathilde, just a quick one for you from Sarah. Would you say that your findings, that these findings on skill shortage applies to other regions as well as Sub-Saharan Africa?
Well, I think that, I would be completely unable to say that would we have the same results if we were studying Asia, or it would mean that we should run another study. From what I know today, it's the very specific results we're presenting in this study are really Sub-Saharan Africa specific. But then it would be very interesting to be able to compare between different parts and different regions, and to see if we have the same or if they are slightly different, and then study the why. But no, for this study, that's really specific to Sub-Saharan Africa.
Thank you. So I'll hand over to Akansha, and I know Sarah's got a question, and so Will's got a question on what's the next step. So what's the next step? We'll hand over to Akansha.
Yeah, interesting question. And I was going to talk about it anyway. So if you see in this research, following on from what Sarah asked earlier, we have only explored the Sub-Saharan Africa as a region. And so in terms of the next steps, it would be very interesting to compare across regions. And I know there will be a lot of similarities. If I personally talk about India or Asia, I know there are going to be a lot of similarities, but there will also be a lot of differences. So that's one of the next steps. We are also exploring if in future research we think about the youth perspective. So this entire research is about the employer's perspective. We've talked to MNOs and youth upskilling organizations. What we haven't considered yet is what do the youth feel? What do they see as barriers in their own career journeys? So that's another topic of research that we at GSMA are considering for sure. We will keep exploring this topic, and from GSMA MPD's side, and trying hard to keep focusing on this topic in the next financial year too. I think we have run out of time. So very quickly, I would like to close the webinar today by thanking all the speakers and contributors for this research, to MasterCard Foundations, as well as to all the listeners and webinar attendees. We are very keen to hear from all of you. You can access this research at gsma.com, mobile for development/youth. We will also follow up with an email, and if you have any questions, you can send emails to us. As I said, there's lots of information at the back end. I'll be very glad to share all of that with you. So stay tuned for more. Thanks again, and goodbye.